So most of you know that I am a competitive Warzone player, so all my settings and everything that I use inside the game in terms of keybinds and mouse clicks and so forth and sensitivity, that's all geared towards me getting the best possible performance out of my computer and myself. Some people like to go for eye candy rather than performance, and some people might prefer a sweet spot in between the two. Whatever your preference is, that's completely up to you. This is just merely a video on what I use in terms of my settings and keybinds. You guys are more than welcome to copy it at your free will. So everything is set in terms of my computer and my keybinds towards getting the best possible performance and maximizing efficiency in terms of my gameplay, especially when I'm competing. So some of these settings and keybinds may seem a little bit arbitrary to you, and that's completely understandable, and I'll try to explain each setting as much as I can. I'll put it up on screen now what my computer specs are so you can see what I'm sort of gearing towards here. So I've been playing on a 144 Hz monitor, which means my monitor refreshes at a rate of 144 times a second. So therefore, to get the best possible competitive performance, I would need to make the game able to reach at least 144 frames per second in order to keep up with that refresh rate. It's a lot more detailed than that, and you guys can Google that whole idea of FPS and refresh rate. But basically what it boils down to is the fact that if I have a higher refresh rate playing against someone who has, let's say, a 60 Hz monitor playing at a 60 Hz refresh rate, I will see more frames in 1 second than that person, which ultimately leads to me seeing either a part of their body or their entire body before they actually see mine. So that's just a little rundown of, you know, FPS and so forth. But we do know that Call of Duty Warzone is very poorly optimized. I definitely think there's still room for optimization, because to reach a 144 frames per second stable, you have to make compromises on a lot of things, which ultimately just ends up being a thing where you just can't see anything in the game. So let's just hop right into game. Let's go through the settings. I'm going to go through all the tabs and my keybinds. Bear in mind that these are just for me. You are more than welcome to copy them, but by all means, they are not set in stone. They may be different for you. So hopping into the game right now, if we just go to options, we can go through all the various tabs. I'm going to leave the keybinds for last because it is quite in-depth, and I'd like to show you guys in a separate sort of fashion than I would be doing this. So we're going to go ahead and skip this first tab and just go over to general. So as I am a PC player, I'm able to set my field of view to max. The reason I do this is so that I can see a lot more in a field of view. So this number here correlates to a degree. So if I'm at 120, that means I'm seeing 120 degrees from this side all the way to this side. So that's how big my field of view is. Bear in mind, the larger you set your field of view, the smaller targets become. If we hop down to the advanced tab, this is a setting not a lot of people know about, and I think that it's a really good setting to change. Usually this is on independent, the ADS field of view. Just change it to affected. Basically what this does is it minimizes recoil. Not physical recoil, but the illusion of recoil, so your gun doesn't move as much. It still has the recoil patterns, but the actual animation of the recoil isn't as much, so it makes aiming just a little bit easier. When we get to the HUD tab here, something that not many people do, by default this minimap shape is set to round. Set it to square. You can just see a whole lot more, and when you rotate you can see things in the corner. So if you had to look at the circle and you had to pretty much transpose it onto the square, you'd see that there's areas that you're not seeing, right? So change it to square. It takes a bit of time getting used to, but trust me, in the long run it just works. You get to see that much more than the average person. So because I need to always know how my system's performing, under the telemetry tab I have quite a few stats enabled. One of them obviously being my FPS counter, so I can see what's happening with my frames. Server latency, super important to know if you're lagging or not. And packet loss is also really important. Moving on to the most important tab, the graphics tab. Before we continue on this, I want you guys to make sure that you look at this little bar here of your VRAM usage. VRAM is just pretty much your storage of video, like data on the graphics card. And what's nice about Call of Duty is they've actually set a bar determining how much VRAM you're using. This max line is obviously dependent on the GPU that you have and the specs that you have. This bar here, we focused on Warzone, we don't really play multiplayer, but you can see that we're not even using half of the VRAM that we have available on our card. So it just basically means that we can turn up settings. So Whenever we turn up a setting or down a setting, you'll see that that bar changes. If it goes past max, you probably want to turn some settings down because then your performance will be decreased. So moving on down, I always play in full screen borderless. That's just how it is. Render resolution, I always have that at 100%. I play at 1080p. I don't have a 2K monitor. I mean a 1440p monitor. So I only play at 1080p. Aspect ratio, you want to keep that automatic. V-Sync, I recommend turning that off unless you have a monitor that supports the G-Sync feature. Custom frame rate limit, this is something that I keep to unlimited because as always, I would definitely want to have the max amount of frames that I can possibly get at any given time. So what's the point of capping that if I want the most that I can get? So keep that at unlimited. And if you're someone who alt tabs out quite frequently or uses multiple monitors on the same computer, make sure that this out of focus custom frame rate limit is at 300 because I think it's usually defaulted at 30. So what happens is if you alt tab or click onto your other screen, it actually changes the game's FPS to 30. So just maybe max that out so you don't have any changes. Nvidia Reflex low latency mode, I would definitely enable this if you can. Trust me, it just does so much. Put it on enabled plus boost. It's going to give you some extra performance out of the game, and that's pretty awesome. Coming down to details and textures, texture resolution at the moment I had at normal. It was at high up until about 2 days ago. Recently, I've been experiencing some really bad FPS drops in Warzone. I'm not too sure if it's the game or if it's my system. That's something I'm just going to have to test out. So I've actually put them down to normal. Usually I have them on high, but for most of the time you'd want to keep these two settings similar. So if it's texture resolutions normal, you'd want the filter to be normal. Particle quality I leave low because that's something that doesn't matter to me. I don't need the GPU processing extra little particles that mean nothing towards my gameplay. And the same is for bullet sprays and bullet impacts and sprays. Tessellation as well, I have that all disabled because it's just extra processing that my computer has to do. Shadow and lighting, for me shadows aren't that important, so I just try and keep that normal to low. Cache the spot shadows and sun shadows, you want to keep those enabled. Those don't really give you any FPS difference whether it's enabled or disabled, so rather just keep it enabled. Particle lighting is also at normal. DirectX ray tracing disabled. We don't want ray tracing, we're not going for eye candy, we're going for performance. Ambient occlusion, that's up to you. I had it on dynamic, it was cool, whatever. I've had to change a lot of settings recently just because of all these FPS drops and so forth, so maybe just keep it on static. But if you're struggling and you need a little bit more FPS, turn it off. It's not important, really isn't. Screen space reflection also disabled. Getting to a tab that is the biggest FPS eater is anti-aliasing. Now with anti-aliasing, basically what it does is it smooths out the edges. For me, coming from a PC that couldn't really handle good graphics, I've always been used to playing with anti-aliasing either low or off. So for me, I've just gotten used to a sharper image rather than a smoother one. I've just found that a smoother image just looks too blurry for me. So there's two ways you can either get around this. One of them is turning the anti-aliasing off or low, which means you'll get a sharper image. But if you have the performance for it and you want to, you can actually turn your anti-aliasing up and then sharpen the image using Nvidia filters, which I'll go over just now. Depth of field, I turn that off. When I ADS, I don't need everything else to be blurry. My peripheral vision when I ADS is important to me, so I need that clear as day, as well as what I'm looking down the sights. World motion blur and weapon motion blur, turn that off. It will make you sick. There's no need for it, to be honest. I don't even know why it's a setting. It doesn't need to be there. And as well as film grain, all the way down to 0. So now let's move on to something that could enhance the gameplay experience. For me, I use it more of a sort of visual experience, not for the pleasure, but more for the actual competitive side. There's this cool thing, and this is only applying to people who have graphic cards that are Nvidia or GeForce graphic cards. There's this awesome thing called Nvidia Filters, and basically what that does is it just overlays a filter and you can do a whole bunch of stuff. So for me, my shortcut to access this Nvidia filter is Alt plus Z. I'm not too sure what the default keybind is, but if you just go through your GeForce experience and go to the settings, then you'll definitely be able to pull this up. But once we're here, what we want to do is we want to go to game filter. I already have game filters on this #1 style. Right now it's off because I wanted to show you how the game looks now from the menu, and as soon as I turn it on, things are a lot more clearer. So I've set it up so that I can see the darker shadows. There's a lot more light on the shadows. especially with a skin like this rose skin. You can't really see them in the darker areas of the map. So this just puts some more light on those darker areas. So to add a filter, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and click add filter, and then just pick whatever you want from the drop down of filters. Now, I'm not going to change any settings. I'm not going to remove them. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through them. The first one you want to put is brightness and contrast. You can go ahead and copy these settings here. Exposure set to 0, contrast set to 31%, highlights 20%, shadows minus 30%, and gamma is at 0. So the next filter you want to add is the details filter, and we want to set the sharpen to 50%, the clarity to 15%, HDR toning to 100%, and bloom to 0%. Now the last filter we want to add is a color filter that pretty much just gives us a lot more color and vibrance to the image. Tint color, that's going to go 0 because we don't need an actual tint, and the same with the intensity of the tint. Temperature just stays there and vibrance stays there. So as far as I know, the tint color just comes up to 10%, so you just want to put that slider down. Everything else is default. It just makes things a little bit better. So if I had to actually turn off all these filters, so we have a more blurry, a more darker image, and as soon as we turn it up, things are a little bit sharpened. We can see a lot more details, and we can see a lot more in those darker areas. Now moving on to a subject that is very, very personalized, and it may seem weird to you, but it works for me. We move to the keybinds. Now each competitive player has their own keybind settings. A lot of things are sort of default and sort of standardized through things like crouching and so forth and going prone. Those keybinds usually stay default, but there are certain ones that do get changed. Bear in mind, when I set up my keybinds, I set them up in a way that allows me to access them without moving my entire hand off the keyboard. So what I mean by that is all my keybinds are set to the left side of my keyboard that I access. So things like weapon switching, tacticals, lethals, crouch, prone, everything like that is set to the left side of the keyboard because that is where my hand sits on the keyboard. So first things first, mouse sensitivity. I have an in-game sense set to 1.7. That's set on every single game that I play, and the reason why I know that if I go in a game and set it to 1.7, my sensitivity will be exactly where it is because of my DPI, and my mouse is set to 800 DPI. So what DPI basically means is the sensor on your mouse is seeing 800 dots per pixel inch, something like that. So what that 800 DPI means, it's pretty much means that my sensor is picking up an area of 800 pixels at a time. If I turn that up, that means my mouse is going to see more, therefore my sensitivity will be higher, and I'd have to lower my in-game sensitivity. When we go to movement, obviously your default movement, WASD, for moving forward, backwards, side to side, and all of that. Slide behavior, I have to tap. Everything here is default in terms of the behaviors. I have automatic sprint disabled because I can sprint normally and I do slide cancel all the time, so I'm always tactical sprinting. My pickup or use is always F. Some of you might use E. I use F, it just works for me, and I'll tell you what I actually use E for in a moment. Jump, stand, melee, whatever, that's default, it's space. Crouch and slide, I have that to left control. It just works better for my pinky. It just pretty much goes from shift to control all the time. And I also just have C as a backup there if need be, like maybe my control button doesn't work, but yeah. Prone I have set to Z. I don't know if that's a default setting or not, but it is there. It's just better for my ring finger. I don't have any gestures or spray set up because I don't use them. It's just a waste of time for me to have them set up and a waste of a keybind. So weapons and equipment, everything here is default, everything. But if we go down to the actual keybinds, obviously those are going to stay default. Your ADS and your fire and your reload is also going to stay default at R. This is where some changes come in. Some people have their next weapon as a scroll, so they use their scroll wheel on their mouse to switch weapons. Some people have 1 and 2. I personally prefer 3 and 4 just because it's easier for my index finger, and if I have a situation where I have a fat fingers, then if my index finger slips off 3 and presses 4, I know I'm still going to be changing the weapon. That's why I have them set to next weapon on both 3 and 4. I have E set up for my melee or punch or whatever you want to call it. It's just a lot more accessible than whatever the default value was, so that just stays there. Lethal equipment, this is my grenades, C4s, Semtex, so forth. I have that at caps lock. It's just much more easier for me to press caps lock than it is for me to press G, because G is right next to my F key. And if you remember, F is set to use an item or get into a car or pick something up. So I don't want to press that by accident while I'm trying to throw a grenade. My tacticals such as flashes, stuns, heartbeat sensor, decoy, grenades, those are set to Q. It's just easier for my finger to move one key up than to do a whole shebang all the way around. Field upgrade is set to G. Usually that would be your lethals or your grenades, but I just have it to G. It's just easier for me. You may also want to set that to X. X is also a good keybind to use for anything that you may want to set to. It's an open keybind, so use it. So when it comes to kill streaks, I have my kill streak set to 1. I can only carry 1 kill streak at a time, so I don't need to set up multiple keybinds for the kill streaks in Warzone. So for me, it's just set to 1. It's out of the way, so I don't accidentally press it, but it's there. I can just press it once. I got the kill streak activated, and then I use it. Now in Warzone, also armor plates for me, I use 2. So everything I need to use in terms of movement and my actual player is from 1 to 4. As I said, is set to the left side of my keyboard, so it's more accessible by my fingers rather than actually moving my entire hand to press a button. Everything else is set to default. One little setting that I may want to just share with you is if you are a console player, I'd recommend changing the setting, armor plate behavior. Change it from applied 1 to apply all. Apply 1 just basically means that if I press, number 2, which is to use my armor plates, if I press that once, it's going to give me 1 plate. But if I had to set this armor plate behavior to apply all, if I press 2 once, it's going to apply as many plates that I need to get to full shield. So if you're on console, put this to apply all. It might just save some time for you. But for me on PC, I just keep it on applied 1 because I don't mind spamming a button. Weapon mounts, I have this set to a button on my mouse. If you look at my mouse, I run the LogitechG Pro wireless, and it has 2 thumb buttons on the side. One of them is for ping and one of them is for weapon mount. I think this is the last setting that I can pretty much give to you. Ping I have on my mouse, and there's a very, very specific reason for that. I know some people use left alt or something else. The reason why I have ping set to a mouse button is because usually when you're pinging something, you're either aiming at it or looking at it. So if I'm with my mouse aiming or looking at it, I can ping and therefore shoot at the exact same time as I'm pinging. So it's a lot easier for me to ADS, see a guy, start shooting. Can then also just use my thumb button to press ping and be like, I'm shooting at this guy. My teammates know I've already put some bullets into them. They just have to turn, put 1 or 2 in, and then we got the kill. So it's an awesome little way to just get into a habit of setting keybinds up to be more efficient in the way you play and give you better performance and speed up your gameplay ultimately. Everything that has to do with firing the weapon must be on my mouse, not on my keyboard. So that's pretty much it in terms of my settings that I use in game. Try these settings out. If they work for you, they work, and by all means use them. They may seem arbitrary in terms of the keybinds especially, but they make sense to me, and hopefully they do make sense to you. If there's something you don't understand and you want a further explanation on in terms of why I set that keybind to that specific key, then please let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll answer your question as soon as I can. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the settings that I use in Warzone. I'll catch you guys on my streams. Remember, I go live on Twitch and Facebook every single day, so go follow me there. And also be sure to follow me on all my social medias. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps the channel grow. And yeah, I'll see you guys on the next one. Enjoy your day.